Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Muslims for Progressive Values. I am your host, Kendra Cordova, and today we have another exciting installment of the Progressive Islam curriculum. Specifically, this one is going to be the first half of the unit on freedom and religion and belief. So the freedom of religion and belief here, we're going to be talking about how that is enshrined in the Quran and Islam, and just getting a better understanding of sort of what those foundations are. If this is your first time watching one of our videos, this whole series has been going on for months. So go back and watch those other ones as well, because we have a lot of great stuff on gender equality, just all sorts of sort of progressive Islamic foundations. So go back on some of all that stuff and then come back here. We're going to continue that now. So lesson one here is just an introduction. We're going to be doing lesson one and lesson two today. So freedom of religion and belief is enshrined as a universal human right by Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which states that everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This right includes the freedom to change religion or belief, the freedom to practice religion or belief as an individual and in a community, in both public and private spaces, and the freedom to manifest a religion and belief in teaching, practice, worship, and observance. Now, again, this does have some limitations, which we're going to go over, and that's going to be as soon as those beliefs start impacting other people, right? So you as an individual have the human right, like the universal God-given right to think, to act, to believe. The only limits we're going to see as we go on is going to be the limitation of anything that steps onto somebody else's universal human rights here is going to be where those lines will be. So under the broader human right, a number of rights are protected, and these include freedom to adopt, change, renounce, or from a religion or belief, freedom from coercion, the right to manifest one's religion and belief, place of worship, religious symbols, observance of holidays or day of rest, appointing clergy and missionary activity, teaching and disseminating materials, appointing clergy, the rights of parents to ensure religious education of children, registration of religious identity, communicate with individual and communities on religious matters, establish and maintain faith-based charitable institutions, and conscientious objection. Okay, that's a lot of stuff. This is protected under international law. This includes both internal and external forms and aspects of freedom of religion and belief. The internal aspect of these rights is going to apply to an individual and how they internalize these aspects of religiosity, including the right to hold or change beliefs, to form and hold opinions based on beliefs, to espouse a religion or belief of their choice, and not hold, reject, or change a religion and belief, and to do each of these entirely free from coercion, be it from individual or state entities. So then the external side here, the external aspect of the freedom of religion and belief applies to both an individual and a community and addresses the right to outwardly display or express a religion or belief. They can teach, worship, or practice this religion, own or use buildings of worship, encourage others to adopt similar religious beliefs. This includes clothing, rituals, symbols, and things like that. External manifestations of religious freedom can be limited, though, according to state and international law, if the limitation placed on these manifestations are necessary to protect the public safety, order, health, or the fundamental rights and freedoms of other individuals, which is what I said previously, where that these freedoms are enshrined only up to the point when they will start affecting somebody else's freedoms. In the international realm, these manifestations are protected under a number of treaties, including the Convention of Rights of the Child, International Convention of the Protection of All Migrant Workers and Members of Their Families, UN Declaration on the Elimination of All Forms of Intolerance and Discrimination based on Religion or Belief, the UN Declaration of the Rights of Persons Belonging to National or Ethnic, Religious, and Linguistic Minorities. Now, of course, even in the cases of the United Nations, as we still see worldwide, this system is not perfect and has not been perfected. There's still discrimination in the world. There are still people who overstep these boundaries. There are still people whose human rights are being violated every day as we speak. But the point is that we are taking these steps in this direction and even just coming to a consensus on something and starting to build a foundation with different cultures, countries, and backgrounds is something that we need to highlight because this is the direction that we need to be going in. And like I said, today we're really going to be covering how these beliefs are actually enshrined in Islam since the beginning and are there in the Quran. Let's see. So progressive Islam and practice. Throughout today, I'm also going to be giving you guys some great examples of how Muslims with progressive values has over the years started to help with these different rights throughout the world. So for this section, MPV protects and promotes the rights of individuals as accorded by their right to freedom of religion and their belief through our inclusive religious curriculum in Burundi. The curriculum is used in 68 madrasas across the country where it reaches 10,000 children and helps to educate these children in the various ways that Islamic teachings protect religious freedom for all. It's important to make education accessible to all ages and all languages. And we're going to see throughout here as well some steps that MPV has taken to help people that have like linguistic diversity as well, because access to information is really the only way to change anything and the only way to sort of fight back against these blanket statements that are sometimes made, talking points, and many of the logical fallacies, which I've gone over in previous videos about belief and why we continue to believe things the way we do. So along with these being protected rights within our international treaties, freedom of religion and belief is also considered a principal right in Islam. So let's see. There are 7 seeds of freedom of religion in Islam that we can see today. Daniel Filippo, who's an author and scholar of religious studies, listed those for us here. So these 7 are going to be verses in the Quran and their interpretation. We're going to go over those today. Life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Liberal and progressive Islam, which you see, in our work and videos as well. Separation of religion and state. History of Muslims' tolerance of non-Muslims. Contemporary Muslim advocates for religious freedom. And finally, freedom in law and institutions in Muslim majority states. So we visited Islamic protection of freedom of religion and belief in a number of times throughout some of our previous units, and how we've denoted that freedom from coercion of any kind is endowed in verse 256 of the Quran. But freedom of religion and belief is also endowed in a number of other Quranic verses, and that's what we're going to look at here today. So obviously the other one that we've talked about a bunch is there is no compulsion in religion. And as I've talked about previously, some people are going to grab that and they're going to say that this only applies to non-Muslims. And then the moment somebody becomes a Muslim, all of a sudden people have the right to put pressure on them and coerce them because, well, they agreed to be coerced by agreeing to be a Muslim. That is completely and utterly inaccurate, as we're going to see here. If someone truly and honestly believes in the Quran, not only in these verses that we're going to show, but in the idea that Allah is the one who guides our hearts, right? And like Allah has the power to guide people and to show people or to, not guide people, that all of that sort of influence falls with Allah. As we're going to talk about as we go through this section, it is so just anti-Islamic and egotistical to believe that a human is somehow supposed to do that job for God. It's some of the stuff. So we're going to be talking about why that just goes against everything here. As a lot of you probably already know, but if you've heard or you're just curious to understand, like, how did we get there? We're going to talk about that too as well. So here's some verses in the Quran that talk about these religious issues here. So we have Surah 18, verse 29. Say, the truth is from your Lord. Whoever desires may acknowledge, and whoever desires may reject. We have prepared for the wicked a fire whose walls will be surrounding them. If they cry out, they are given a liquid like boiling oil, which burns their faces. What a miserable place. So obviously the second part goes into that warning that we've talked about previously. But this first part is the part that we're talking about. Throughout the Quran, it literally points out how God guides who he wills. The information is there. The truth is made clear. People can take it or leave it. And that is what this verse here is. We have Surah 109, ayahs 2 through 6 say, O ingrates, I do not serve what you serve, nor do you serve what I serve, nor will I serve what you serve, nor will you serve what I serve. To you is your system, and to me is mine. And so that means even if there are people who, are harassing you or talking bad about you or telling you you need to be like us and you're wrong, the line here is like, look, you believe what you believe and I believe what I believe, and that's just going to have to be that, right? Like, I understand that I cannot make you believe a certain way, and you need to understand you can't make me believe a certain way, and that's not up to us to judge. That's up to God. Like, we just drop it there, right? Again, in the Quran, it says this. Surah 64, Ayah 12. Obey God and obey the messenger. If you turn away, then it is only required of our messenger to deliver clearly. We're going to go over verses like this, okay? Yes, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was a leader. Yes, he was in charge of, the armies as they were in battles and all of that. He was the leader for the Muslims, trying to make the best choices and guide people and set up this system. But throughout the Quran, it points over and over and over, you are but a messenger of God. You are but a messenger of God. If it says that to Prophet Muhammad, why would a non-prophet, everyday, run-of-the-mill human somehow have more power over people than that? Like, that directly goes against lines like this. So I want to make that very clear here. And the reason I am so serious about this, and I will be throughout this entire unit, is because this is one of those this is one of those very serious topics. Because unlike some of the other things where we've talked about where it's misinformation or it leads to harassment and things like that, in many situations, this can lead to life and death situations for people. We need to take this seriously, and we need to be very firm in saying that we are here to follow the word of Allah. And Allah says so many times throughout the Quran these different things. We need to listen. That's why you're going to see me so serious throughout this unit. I'm very passionate about this. So, Surah 11, Ayah 28, he said, My people, do you not see that I have proof from my Lord, and they gave me mercy from themselves, but you are blinded to it. Shall we compel you to it while you are averse to it? Meaning, I understand that I have no control over compelling you to believe a certain way. I have shown you everything that I can. If you don't believe, that's on you. Surah 10, Ayah 99. Had your Lord willed, all the people on earth in their entirety would have acknowledged. Would you force the people to make them acknowledge? Allah could have made everybody Muslim. Allah has that power. Allah didn't. And that is not for you to fix. Does that make sense? Like, we as Muslims are here to be the Muslims we can be. Okay? And I'm going to go over some of this more as we go throughout this lesson, but we always hear this thing, life is a test, life is a test, life is a test, right? And then at the end, we are judged by Allah. We are judged on ourselves, not on what other people do. As a teacher, I give tests. If a student only puts the answers down that another student tells them to do, because that other student is threatening to beat them up if they don't do that, that test is not valid. That test was not a show of that student's choices. That's how that works. So if we are coming to judgment with Allah, we need to be free to make the choices and hold the beliefs and worship Allah and have this human experience to be properly judged. very, very important for our own judgment and experience and connection with Allah, and for anybody else's as well. Surah 88, ayah 21 through 22. So remind, for you are but a reminder, you have no power over them. Surah 27, ayah 2, a guide and good news to those who acknowledge. Surah 16, ayah 9, to God shall be the path, but some are misled. If they wished, they could have guided you all. Surah 5, ayah 48. We have sent down to you the book with truth, authenticating what is present of the book and superseding it. So judge between them by what God has sent down, and do not follow their desires from what has come to you of the truth. For each of you, we have made laws, a structure. Had God willed, they would have made you all one nation. But they test you with what they've given you. So advance the good deeds. To God you will return, all of you, and they will inform you regarding that which you dispute. I mean, there you go. According to these verses of the Quran, belief is a personal choice that only involves the individual and God, implying that persuasion and coercion when it comes to religious matters is unacceptable. We must address that over the years, certain misconceptions have been made about Quranic verses that have been manipulated to imply that Islam is an intolerant religion. We're going to look at some of those as well, and it really is important to note here the same thing you're going to hear me say in every single lesson in every single part of the Progressive Islam curriculum and any other video that you see me in, and that is context. I will say that word 100,000 times throughout this. Context, 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 context. Context matters. It really, 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 really matters. Everybody's case, everybody's situation, everybody's everything is individual and nuanced. If you see the world black and white, you are missing a lot of information. That is a very simplistic way of looking at the world. And scholars like Dr. Shabir Ali, for example, I was just watching one of his videos the other day, and he was talking about how we have this problem with like lazy intellectualism. That's what that is. If you just have two options, you have this false dichotomy. It's this or it's that, believer, not believer. It's, good or bad. And you just have this like complete no nuance in anything at all. That is lazy intellectualism, and you're not going to come to the right conclusion. You can't, because the experiences in the world are just so diverse. So please, 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 anytime you read a line in the Quran, or you listen to a khutbah at the masjid, and you hear something and you're not sure about it, or you hear a hadith, whatever's going on, go and research, go and find the information. We live in an age of information now. You can learn, you can read, you can grow. We have so much access to information now. And as Muslims, it is so important to educate ourselves. Please go and look for context, and do not take anything at face value. It's so important. I was listening to Mufti Mink as well, a lot this week, and he had a similar speech. I wish I could remember which one it was, but I listened to so many of them recently, I can't remember which one it was. But he said the same thing, right? Where it's like, it doesn't matter, what a person's faith is. Like, we need to take everything in nuance and care and love and all that. So a lot of the topics we're talking about today, he talks about as well. If you like some of his work, go listen to him. Find a scholar that you trust and love, and listen to some of the stuff that they say on this. We do have a lot of scholars out there right now who are acknowledging the openness and the kindness and the like universal living with different cultures and faiths and everything that we do here as Muslims, and the history of that. So go learn as much as you can on that. We're going to cover some of that today, though. So here are 6 things to remember as we start to take a look at why we are the way we are, about where we can go from here, and how some of this information is the way it is. So first thing here, as I just said, it is vital to consider the historical context of when these verses were revealed, and the violence being used against the Muslims for attempting to freely and safely practice their own faith. We must distinguish between individuals hostile to Muslims and those who used violence to prevent Muslims from freely practicing their religion from non-Muslims who wanted to live in peace. Those are two completely different groups of people. Quranic values of adl, which is fairness, and aql, which is justice, should serve as the baseline for how Muslims understand their responsibility to protect religious freedom for all. The categorization of all Muslims as let's see if I can do this again. Y'all know me, my Arabic is the worst. Here we go. Al Dima is no longer relevant because there's no clear delineation between the abode of war and the abode of Islam. Verses that refer to violence, like Surah 28, Ayah 29, Surah 5, Ayah 54, and Surah 9, Ayah 73, should only be understood in extremely hostile contexts and cannot be generalized as norms for how the Muslim community should treat other religious communities. And then finally, we must acknowledge that even when referring to individuals who are hostile to Muslims, because of their religious beliefs, there's no mention of forcing non-Muslim individuals who lived in a Muslim state to convert to Islam, but to recognize the authority of the Muslim state. Okay. Oftentimes, when you look at verses in the Quran that are often misunderstood by Muslims and non-Muslims, like the kind of verses that non-Muslims will grab out of the Quran and they'll use as like, see, Muslims want to kill everybody, are in the context of like all of the verses around them are usually talking about some kind of war that was going on. You have to remember that when they say like the early Muslim persecutions and wars and stuff that were going on, that is not like the kind of daily stuff and harassment that we see nowadays, okay? And that stuff is bad. Harassing anybody is bad, okay? But I'm talking like legitimate like violence and fear and they didn't have anywhere near the kind of weaponry that we have nowadays, but looking at these awful situations, like what you see in places like Gaza, right? Free Palestine. As you know, we have that, we support Palestine here and Muslims for Progressive Values, but killing Muslims for being Muslims was a thing at that time. And so when you see them talking about not trusting certain groups of people or fighting against certain groups of people, this was not just a blanket like, oh, because they pray a certain way. This was like an active conflict at the time. So we're going to look at that as well. Within Islamic tradition, religious freedom is deeply tied to free will because of the role that sin, atonement, and forgiveness play in Islamic beliefs, especially the belief in the afterlife. This free will or individual responsibility means that each human is responsible for what they do or do not do on earth, implying that salvation is an individual effort rather than a collective effort. Therefore, God, rather than other humans, is responsible for holding individuals accountable for the choices they make in their lifetime, including the religion they choose to practice and how this practice manifests. So yes, there are limitations on what you can do religiously, and that's again going to be when the way that you are practicing your faith is getting in the way of somebody else, harming somebody else, like infringing on somebody else's rights. But if it's not, it is not anybody else's job. It is God's job. Okay? Because look, even if you look across the world at all of the different groups of Muslims, there are so many different, and this is a blessing to have all of this diversity, but we have to remember that like your version of Islam was not the only version of Islam. Like there are different schools of thought, there are different interpretations, there are different cultures and views. And as we go through that, when you say that if somebody is different, that they're somehow leaving Islam or not a Muslim anymore. I just made a TikTok about that. If you guys don't follow me on TikTok, I'm starting to go back to making some of these Islamic TikToks again. So if you guys want some of this information in short little bites, you can find me over there. But I just made one of these where I was like putting up some of these verses and I was like, I get very tired of seeing people online, Muslims going after other Muslims and calling them like kafirs and stuff like that because they follow a different interpretation than another Muslim does about something. Like that's not how that works. We're going to be looking at that here. And that even if somebody does leave Islam, that again, we're going to be looking at here is not really your problem because the only things that you are in charge of is what you choose to do. And the only things you're judged on are what you choose to do. And I can guarantee you, anybody go look at the reverts. Look, Muslims love talking about how everybody's always reverting to Islam, right? Grab any group of Muslims and they're like, oh, mashallah, so many people are becoming Muslim. And yes, this is true. How many of those Muslims are talking about how much they love Islam and they're learning how to pray and they're so excited to become Muslims because somebody threatened them to do so? Okay, when you look at those Muslims, they're going to say, I met some amazing Muslims and they were the most incredible people in the world and I wanted to be more like them. Or they're going to say, the war that's going on in Gaza, I wanted to learn more about it. And as I did, I learned more about how amazing Islam is and I became a Muslim. Like, if you are truly and honestly worried about somebody leaving Islam, you becoming aggressive towards them is going to give them more reasons to walk away. And I've told people this when I've talked to Muslims who said that the only reason why they were Muslim is because they were forced to, they were threatened, like they were physically assaulted, they were any of that stuff. And they said, I felt like I had to leave because, you know, I didn't want to be part of whatever that was. I have told them, first of all, you know, Muslims have progressive values, learn about all this stuff. That's not what Islam is supposed to be. But if that is the only version of Islam you know, and that's the only thing that you have to look at, and you don't want to be a part of that, that's good. You shouldn't want to be a part of something that's abusive and coercive and manipulative. Okay? And we should not allow our fellow Muslims to be doing that to each other. It's un-Islamic. And that's what we're learning about here today. So, after all, if God had wanted everyone to practice Islam, which we just talked about, they would have made everyone Muslim. Okay? So, therefore, the correct faith comes not from practicing Islam alone, but from practicing a faith rooted in an individual's own convictions rather than something they are forced to believe in. We've talked about this in previous videos as well, right? That Allah judges our hearts, Allah judges our intentions, right? Like, you can go through the motions. You can dress like a Muslim and you can do all the prayers and you can do all that stuff. But if it's not in your heart, that's what Allah's judging. Allah's judging your heart. Okay, so let's talk about the academics that are around defining rights of non-Muslims and what like a non-Muslim is. You're going to get these like four different types of views. Of course, there's always more, but four main views on this as far as like academics go. And this is going to tell you a lot about like sort of where that academic stands on this religious freedom. And as we go into this religious freedom, another thing I want you guys to hold in mind, especially if you're unsure still about this topic, right? Is that whole like it should make sense if you flip it in either direction. If you can only do it in one direction, there's bias there. I am lucky enough to be raised in and to live in a country that currently has religious freedom enshrined in its law and social pressures and all that. It is that religious freedom that allowed me to research and find and convert to Islam. If I had not had that right, I might have never found Islam and I might never have converted. And I want that level of freedom for every single person. Because as it says in the Quran, right, the truth is there. Now, everybody needs the right to be able to double check and to learn and to grow and to find truth and to find God. But if you are excited about somebody that can convert to Islam and that excites you, like knowing that they didn't grow up with Islam and they learned about it and they converted, which I hear from Muslims all the time. And yes, I feel the same way when I see people convert to Islam. But if you like that, that is freedom of religion. And you got to be okay with it going in the opposite direction. You can't do this one-sided like thing. It's got to be universal. if you really honestly, truly believe in people finding God and finding truth and living that truth, you have to allow that. So here are the four mainstream theological positions when it comes to freedom of religion and belief. The first one is exclusive. So this is Islam is the only path to salvation. Islam is the formal religion sent through Muhammad, peace be upon him, and remains pure and uncorrupted until the day of judgment. And it refers to verses 319, 385 of the Quran to support the belief that Islam is the only true religion that can lead to salvation. So these people say Islam, the traditional way, exactly how it is, this is it, and there's nothing else. There's no other way to be saved. That's exclusive. Next level is called inclusive. Anyone who believes in God and the final day and does good deeds is eligible for salvation. Believing in Islam and following the path of Muhammad, peace be upon him, are not requirements for salvation. Stresses the general meaning of the Quranic verses 262 and 569. Refers to the hadith, faith is not with wishful thinking. It is what is revered in the heart and what action proves it, to support this inclusive interpretation. So you're going to see lines in the Quran, for example, that talk about how there are Christians and Jews and Sabians, anyone who believes in Allah and does good deeds will go to Jannah. That is also in the Quran. So an inclusive academic is going to hold that second level. They're going to see it like that. There's also called a pluralist. So pluralist here believes that all religions possess a common reality that refers to a transcendental reality, which describes God through different names, emphasizes the sincerity of faith as opposed to the outer expressions or practices of faith, refers to Quran 7:156 to emphasize that all Muslims and non-Muslims can be both righteous and sinful, meaning that all people are eligible for God's mercy, stresses the inclusive interpretation of verse 262 to emphasize the divine qualities of love and the vastness of God's grace. This is going to kind of fall under this group you might have heard called Universal Sufism. So there are Sufis that fall under this like universalist. They start to fall into this like pluralist academics that we see here. And that is the idea that since God can guide us how they will, and since God didn't make everybody Muslim, that anybody who is trying to connect with God and receive God, regardless of their faith, has this equal right to salvation. And then the last one is descriptive. So this is going to be like a higher academic sort of view. This kind of takes the emotion out of faith, and it's going to focus on like just an academic look at these things. So descriptive evaluates different religions on their own terms of salvation rather than judging them in Islamic terms and Islamic theology. Typically used by academics and scholars, acknowledges the importance of learning about other religions to suggest that the plurality of religions is a blessing as it presents an opportunity for religious dialogue. So, I've already guessed probably MPV falls under the pluralist theological position. It's deeply embedded in MPV's inclusive Islam curriculum, as we have been learning. We also have the one for children, and the pluralist mindset, the pluralist teachings there are in there as well. This was put together by Annie Zonneveld. She's MPV's founder and president. You might have seen my interview with her. She's amazing. And Shalina Tareen, an early childhood expert. The curriculum is designed to educate Muslim children in the West about Islam by highlighting the religion's pluralistic values that promote human rights for all. So yes, Muslims for Progressive Values holds a pluralist view. And again, while yes, you're going to see me get very passionate about Islam and all of these things, I myself hold this pluralist view. I look out at the world and I see people doing good, and I never think any differently of anybody of any different faith. When I see them doing good, they're doing good. When they're helping people, they're helping people. When they're giving their time and volunteering and feeding the poor and holding the door open for someone and, anything. A good person is a good person, right? And that's what we teach here, Muslims for Progressive Values. You're going to hear me talking about Islam, when it comes to like in and out of Islam in these lessons, just because specifically we're talking about that freedom of belief. But it doesn't uh, mean that there's some sort of like, I don't know, idea that like Muslims are somehow better or something than other people, especially when it comes to the idea of God's judgment. What I am saying here is that like if you are a Muslim and you're a strong believer, you should believe that people have the freedom to make these choices and that it needs to be up to Allah, what those choices end up becoming on the other side. All right. Let's see. So, Quranic verses regarding religious freedom impacted theological approach of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in particular, verse 88:21, which is, so remind for you are but a reminder you have no power over them. We must pause here to consider that if the Prophet Muhammad was commanded not to compel people to believe in Islam, what makes other individuals believe that they have this right? That's what I just said earlier, right? Like if the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, of all people, was told that he was just here to teach, take it or leave it, who do you think you are to come out here and say that you can be harsher or more in charge than him? That's, again, I don't, it's crazy to me. I look out at the world and some of you guys know I'm working on a second master's right now in clinical mental health counseling. And so we study personalities, we study why people do the things that they do. And while I understand it from an academic standpoint, when I look at the world and I look at other people, it's very hard for me to comprehend that level of ego. That's one thing that still baffles me when I run into it out in the world. So there's no single answer that explains all this, but it is undeniable that when an individual does intervene in the free will of another's right to freedom of religion, it is a direct violation of Tawhid, which is the idea that there's only one God and Allah is in charge of everything, right? Um, let's see. In examining the life of the Prophet, we see time and time again how the Quranic command manifested in his life. He was persecuted for nearly his entire adult life because of his religious views, yet he remained tolerant of others' religious freedoms. The various hadith that describe how the Prophet interacted with non-Muslims depart from mere tolerance and instead depict total inclusion of other faiths. Now you're going to notice that a lot of these apostasy laws that you're going to see often came from hadith. I highly recommend going over to Let the Quran Speak and seeing Dr. Shabir Ali's video series on apostasy in Islam and the comparison between the Quran and the hadiths and sort of his take on those. He did a whole breakdown that I thought was really, really great. It's been helpful as I've been doing some prior research coming up to these lessons. I recommend him and some of his work as well. One hadith tells of a group of Jews in Medina coming to the Prophet to ask him to judge a matter of adultery in their community. Rather than refer to the Quran, the Prophet referred to the Jewish scripture to issue an opinion on the matter. So, in clinical mental health counseling, this is part of the code of ethics that you follow. And as you are taking care of clients that have a different cultural or religious background or a different worldview than your own, it is considered completely and utterly unethical to put your worldview on them or to try to get them to see things from your worldview side. Instead, what you're told to do is to help the client from their worldview, not from yours. And that is exactly what it talks about here in this hadith, is that instead of the Prophet Muhammad saying, well, according to my worldview and my belief, this is what you should do. He said, well, you guys have this faith, so let's take a look at your scriptures and see what we could decide from that. So the Prophet also accepted the presence of non-believers in his own family, accepting his son-in-law, Abu al-As, the husband of his daughter, Zainab, who he remained a pagan after the revelation of the Quran, and his own wife's conversion to Islam. When the Muslims fled from Mecca to Medina, at the tomb, of Azam Shah highlights the tolerance where Hindu imagery can be found at the gravesite, the tomb, and the mosque. There are also historical instances of Christians eating pork and drinking alcohol without punishment by Shah Jahan, the ruler at this time. Muslims, when they ruled Bengal, also deviated from other Muslim-controlled areas of India, where a poll tax was imposed on non-Muslims, which was not the case for non-Muslim citizens of Bengal. While none of these case studies can do justice to the teachings of the Quran or other ethics dictated by the covenants of the Prophet Muhammad, they demonstrate instances where Muslim leaders were committed to protecting the religious liberties of non-Muslims, an increasingly uncommon feat in the 21st century. Nowadays, we have much less tolerance than we used to in the past in Islam. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. I do want to talk about very quickly, as we move on to this next chapter, we go over these last couple things for tonight's class. I want to talk just a little bit more on the psychology, because one of the reasons why, and again, yes, it is difficult to wrap your mind around like this level of ego, but there are some psychological things that happen with humans that we need to sort of understand why ideas like the changing of a belief system or the confrontation of one belief system to another is so like volatile. It sparks so much like anger and violence and controversy. So I have a couple different things I want to point out here just super fast. One of them I've talked about in previous videos as well, if you're familiar with it, but it's the concept of the backfire effect. Basically what the backfire effect is that they did brain scans of people who were being introduced with ideas that went against their worldview. So they were put in like getting brain scans done, and they would say things to them that were super controversial. And then they watched what their brain did. And what they learned is that a human's brain reacts to an intellectual or worldview threat, meaning something that changes the foundations of their core beliefs or is opposing to them. Your brain reacts in the exact same way as it does to a physical threat. So your brain, when you are looking at somebody who is telling you something that goes against your beliefs, is going to react to that person as if they were pointing a gun at you, which is why you see people online, in person, and anything else becoming immediately hostile. Because their brain is like, kill it. Like, no, scary, bad, gonna hurt you, get rid of it. And so that is one of these reasons. Now, the only way to overcome the backfire effect is actually to become aware of it and stop yourself from doing it. And that is very, very hard, especially if the people that you're talking to and working with are not aware of any of that stuff. They haven't looked into psychology, and they haven't looked into belief systems or had to do a lot of inner work on why they believe what they believe and double checking for bias. So if you're wondering why people get so like literally violent throughout history when it comes to people that just are like, hey, I think differently than you, and it turns into a thing, that's one of the reasons why. Another thing, and my fiance helped me with this one because he came from a family and an upbringing that was highly, highly conservative, and he ended up being very progressive. And I was like, help me to understand why, like how you got out of that, and like why before you became progressive, like what is the mindset behind sticking with it, even, if you know that it might not be correct, and he said that it really breaks down to the idea that it feels very personal, in that if this is wrong, then that means that the people you love and the people that are closest to you are wrong. This means that your parents are wrong. This means that your teachers are wrong. This means that the people that you look up to and the people that you trusted and believed blindly were wrong. And then you then also have to take down on your own ego and say, if this was wrong and the harm that I caused those other people when I was doing this or behaving in this way, that means that I did something wrong. And then you have to reflect on that and take that on. And humans are not very good at that. They're, humans are terrible at acknowledging flaws in themselves and in change, because change is very scary. While we have progressed, our caveman brains are still in there, guys. So things that stayed the same, right, were safe. You wanted your community to like you because if your community didn't like you and they exiled you, you had no food source, you had no protection, you had none of that stuff. So your brain is wired to want to be liked and appreciated and understood and accepted by the people closest to you, by your family, by your tribe, by your whoever. So change, facing new things, or not fitting in with the people around you are actually wired in your brain for you to not do that. So that is one of the reasons why, as we come to these discussions, as we come to these talks, that it's so important to keep that in mind because there is hostility when we talk about this. And you might even notice yourself starting to feel that way or starting to get agitated or anything like that. So being aware of it is key. Seeing it in other people is key. And just education. So now we're going to go on to lesson two. Lesson two is a little shorter. We're just going to hit a few little points here of some examples from the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and some of those examples from the covenants of the Prophet Muhammad, promises that he made. All right, so we're going to go into lesson two here. So this is going to be the covenants of the Prophet Muhammad. The covenants of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, refer to the collection of historical documents, mainly peace treaties, which demonstrate the Prophet's effort to create a union of free people, all who had the right of freedom of movement, work, education, religion, and expression. These covenants embody the mission of the Prophet as instructed to him by God through the revelations of the Quran. So, I won't make notes as we go through. Some of these are very, very solid. A couple of these are actually debated as to their legitimacy in the same way that hadiths, right, are debated on their legitimacy. So I'm going to make you guys aware of some of those as we go through them. But some of these are very just like legit, good to go, authenticated documents. The super authenticated one we're going to start off with first. So that's going to be the Charter of Medina. So this is going to be the first constitution, right, that was ever created. And it is there to really enshrine some of these universal human rights here. So the Charter of Medina, which was a written agreement between the various religious communities in Medina, that was drafted during the 2 to 3 years after the Hijra. So that's 622 CE. The agreement, which is considered the first ever written constitution in human history, applied to the 10,000 citizens of Medina, including the Muhajirun. Sorry, again, I love you guys, and I'm glad you guys listened to me, but I will forever tell you that my Arabic pronunciations are terrible. I've had teachers, and it's not sticking. The Muslim refugees from Mecca, Jews, the pagans, Christians, and the Ansars, the newly converted Muslims. Written on leather and sealed by the Prophet, the agreement makes no reference to restrictions on religious freedoms and instead asserts that Medina was a multi-religious and pluralistic society. The Charter of Medina dictated that each religious community would manage its own affairs and follow its own religious norms, creating a federal structure where each religious or tribal autonomy group had autonomy, but they were all united under one central authority. So that's going to be kind of what you see in like the modern secular governments, right? Where the idea is that like we all have like universal rules, but then of course, like when it comes to needing like religious guidance or like family stuff going on, or how should I, atone for this certain sin or whatever that is, you're going to go to like your religious people for that. Okay, so looking at Clause 45 and Clause 47 from it, Clause 45 stated that Jews and pagan Arabs were entitled to freely practice their own faith. Clause 47 protected the human rights for all citizens, including freedom of conscience and religion. So it is important to note here that there was tax, a higher tax on non-Muslims than there is on Muslims when you look at some of these earlier Islamic societies. But then it's also important to note that Muslims also had zakat, which needed to be paid, which in many cases would actually be higher than the tax that was paid by the non-Muslims. So, it's kind of give and take. There's like a balance here, always depending on the person in charge. Humans are flawed. So you're going to find, some rulers that did it really well. You're going to find some rulers who did it terribly. And that's just kind of how that is everywhere. So, let's see. These autonomous groups were not united by religious beliefs, but rather by a common commitment to justice for all. This commitment was strengthened by the obligations that the treaty placed on the residents of Medina in instances where security of Medina was threatened, intertribal conflict took place, or if crimes were committed. With these obligations, the residents of Medina became codependent on one another outside of the security of the tribal structure that Muslims had abandoned in Mecca. It also stipulated a change in identity, which was no longer based on race, religion, kinship, class, gender, or tribal affiliation, but instead on their membership or citizenship within the Ummah. Ummah, therefore, did not refer exclusively to Muslims, but instead to all individuals who lived in the pluralistic, multi-ethnic, multiracial, and multi-religious state of Medina. Finally, the Charter of Medina, one of the first documents to establish religious freedom for all, stipulated that Allah's protection is the one and applicable to all individuals equally. So that the Charter of Medina, the Constitution of Medina, is definitely the most scholarly authenticated piece that we're going to be looking at in this lesson. But it is a wonderful example. I do want to just take 2 seconds here to just remind us about that difference between like people that you're fighting with and people that you're not fighting with. So, bringing up Palestine again really quick, because that's kind of the closest modern thing that we can probably think of that we could almost equate, although again, like what's going on in Palestine right now is far worse as far as that goes because of the modern weaponry and the modern warfare that we have. But when it came to apostasy or when it came to leaving Islam during these times of war, this is not talking about they decided to start reading a Bible instead and then they were praying differently. Like that is not the situation here. We're talking about one side versus another side. When you say that you're leaving the Muslim side, it's the same thing as treason because you know where they live, you know what their movements are, you know what their schedules are, you know all of their stuff. And when you're in a time of war, that person now has information on you and your families that could get you guys killed. It's a safety is information thing. And that is why in like all like major countries around the world, they have laws against treason. And it is because that is like the one thing that should be taken super seriously if you are at any kind of active conflict because it doesn't put just you in danger, it doesn't put just them in danger, it can put every single person in danger. So the idea that someone is going to the other side or to the other faith or to the other group in that active warfare, again, it has nothing to do with a daily change in belief. It has to do with the fact that, oh my gosh, they're going to go hang out with the people that are trying to kill us. And they know all of our information. That's super dangerous. I've told you guys in previous videos, I work as a teacher actually in a very violent group, an area. And so we see sort of like gang conflict going on where some of our students will take stuff like from the street and like bring it in the classroom. And that is sort of like the kinds of conversations and stuff that you hear, right? Is that if this friend starts hanging out with this other friend, it's not, oh, hey, I wanted to sit with this other guy at lunch. That's like not what you just witnessed in that context. What you just witnessed was, again, some people having information over here and moving the information over here, which can turn into something much more serious down the road. So please keep that in mind whenever we're talking about a change in faith or the concept of apostasy. So the next one is the Ashtiname of Muhammad. This one is one of the ones that has debated authenticity. The Ashtiname of Muhammad was written on leather textile by Muhammad's cousin and son-in-law Ali. Was drafted sometime between 624 625 CE in the aftermath of the Muslims' migration to Medina. The Ashtiname, which translates from Persian to Book of Peace, was a treaty between Muhammad and the monks of Mount Sinai at St. Catherine's Monastery. The monastery was a prominent place in Christianity at the time, serving as an important place to study and scholarship since its establishment in 565 CE and is noted as an important location for religious events from the Bible. So the reason why this one is debated is because, first of all, any ancient sort of text agreement thing has to be like checked and double checked and triple checked and all of that because it's pretty easy to forge things, especially back then. And then also because this agreement does was used to help the Christians to sort of gain some of these like peaceful treatments or sort of like to get deals on their side when it came to working with Muslims, which, you know, great. But that is sort of why some people start to question it, is because it's like, okay, but like what was like the motivation of having this? But here in this lesson, we are talking about it as a proof of sort of this religious pluralism, which was central to early Islam. So on a physical document, there's a handprint of the Prophet's as his signature, sealing the protection he granted to Christians. Through the signing of the document, historical records state that the Prophet frequented the monastery, establishing a friendly relationship with the monks, and whom he would often have deep philosophical discussions, a relationship narrated by Ibn Kathir in the stories of the Prophet. So I have that book. I bring it up all the time in some of my classes. So after this, I might go and make like another video that just goes over that entire section since it correlates with these lessons of that book. Let's see. Let's move on though. So the document, which reads that it, quote, was sent to all people as a trust on the part of God to all of his creatures, that they may have no plea against God hereafter. Verily, God is omnipotent, the wise. Dictates a number of ethics for Muslims across the world to abide by. Ethics of that were put in here is going to be that it protected Christian houses of worship, protected the rights of Christian women who are married to Muslim men, called on Muslims to protect the lives of Christians, called on Muslims to fight to defend the lives of Christians, called on Muslims to protect Christians while they worship, prohibited Muslims from compelling Christians in any way, prohibited Muslims from compelling Christians to go to war to protect Muslims, prohibited Muslims from forcing Christians to give from their income unless they are willing, and prohibited Muslims from placing the jizya tax on judges, monks, or anyone who works in worship of God. So this is just providing some of those protections for Christians to not be coerced or used by Muslims who are in charge of a certain area or who are working with them. How do I say this? Even nowadays, we are still continuing to have struggles, and it is so important that Muslims, Christians, Jews, and any other major faith, Hindus, whoever you are, that we are always making sure that we are not coercing other people, and that while we can have these lively discussions, we should be sharing our ideas, we should be asking each other questions and trying to understand each other, that even in our modern times, we are having this hostility with each other. And looking back on some of these, we need to remember how important it is to allow each other to the freedom of that faith and to celebrate and to protect each other. Like we need to protect each other's rights, especially if you are living in a country or a part of the world or a city that has all of this diversity. Um, it's it's really easy to abuse power when you get in power. And so we need to be checking ourselves at all times and making sure that we are doing things equitably, even for those who are not necessarily looking like us, praying like us, sounding like us, or anything like that. We're starting to see turns in many places, including where I'm from, including here in the United States. We're starting to get a lot more um, conservatism and hostility towards people who are different and those are different faiths. The number of hate comments I get from non-Muslims towards myself has been increasing as of late. And the idea that other people, non-Muslims, would be getting these sorts of comments from Muslims, vice versa, and all of that is something that all of us need to be responsible for trying to change. So, two of the quick hits here. We have covenant with the Christians of Najran. So, the Christians of Najran lived in modern day Saudi Arabia, or I guess Najran, because it's that like light A, the on. Um, Modern day Saudi Arabia, which was considered an important seat of Christianity at the time. The issuing of Prophet Muhammad's covenant with the Christians of Najran was preceded by communication between the Prophet and the leaders of Najran's Christian community. According to historical records, Muhammad sent a delegation of Muslims to Najran, who then invited the Christians to convert to Islam. The Christians refused, instead choosing to send a delegation of 60 people to Medina to meet the Prophet and converse with him in 631 CE. While in Medina, Muhammad provided them with a place to stay and invited them to conduct their prayer in the masjid. During this visit, the Christian delegation attempted to convert Muhammad to Christianity, which led to lively debates about the two religions and the doctrines between the parties, and ultimately ended in the two parties entering into a peace treaty. The peace treaty was dictated by the Prophet and scribed by Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, later the first Umayyad Caliph. The covenant did not relegate Christians to second-class citizens, but instead affirmed their equal status and rights as Muslims by issuing the following commands. Stipulated that no bishop, monk, or rabbi should be removed from their position, provided religious autonomy to non-Muslims who lived in the state ruled by a Muslim leader, guaranteed the rights of Christians to have security over their lives, religion, and property, provided Christians with complete freedom of religion, prohibited Muslims from interfering in the religious practices of non-Muslims or from destroying religious property, forbade the oppression of Christians, prohibited Muslims from leaving Christians without help or assistance or neglecting them. So again, just like a general, like, hey, we got you, you're good, you got us, don't push stuff on us, won't push stuff on you, good to go. It is a little funny that they kind of went back and forth where like the Muslims were like, come join Islam, and then the Christians were like, come join Christianity, and then they were like, let's just have a peace treaty. Like really, that's the conclusion here, right? And we were just talking about that in the Quran earlier in this lesson, was that it literally says like, to you is your stuff, to me is mine, and that's just how it is. Final one here is the Treaty of Makna. So the Treaty of Makna was produced in the later part of the Prophet Muhammad's life and provided protection to the Jewish communities, including the Hanina, the Makna, and the Khaybar tribes who resided in northwest Arabia at the time. The language of the treaty was dictated by the Prophet, written by Ali bin Abi Talib, and witnessed by three prominent companions of the Prophet. The treaty was significant in that it protected the religious right from the rights of the Jewish people living in Muslim-ruled lands, but also because it served to demonstrate a continuation of peaceful relations between Muslims and Jews after the conflict between the Muslims and three of the many Jewish tribes in Medina. A number of rights are stipulated in the covenant that protected the Jewish people's right to life, property, and religion. The right to life, right to property, right to religion, examples being stated that Jews were exempt from military participation and were not required to fight for Muslim causes. Protected the Jewish people's right to safety and health, decreed that Jews had the right to self-defense, promised 1/4 of the Muslim tax to the Jewish population as long as they abided by the law and remained loyal to the state, forbid the imposition of a land of tax on Jews, protected the religious practices and rights of Jews, including funeral rites and religious manifestations, protected the rights of Jews to manifest their religious beliefs through their clothing. So again, just like, hey guys, you can do your stuff. Just don't be like fighting us. We're all good. You guys probably already know, most Muslims do. If you're not a Muslim or if you are new, you might not have heard it, but the story of what happened when the Prophet Muhammad went back with his followers to Mecca when they took over Mecca. And the whole question there at the end when they, won was, what do you think we're going to do to you? Which is always funny because back then the obvious answer would have been like, I don't know, enslave us, kill us, like something crazy because that's just the way it was. And the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was like, what do you think we're going to do? And he just goes, you guys are free. Just don't fight us. Like, we're in charge now. We're going to have laws. We're going to have tax. We're going to have all that stuff. But like, we forgive you. Like, you're good. And that act of mercy, the examples here that we have, I mean, it's so central to the traditional Islam. And we really need to just anchor to it. Oh, look, I do. I have one more little thing here. Yeah. One more quick hit here. Covenant with the Assyrian Christians. There's also this one as well. So covenant with the Assyrian Christians was dictated by the Prophet to Movija bin Sophian in 626. The covenant issued a number of guidelines for Muslims to follow in accordance with the protection of religious rights to Christians, especially Christian women. So, it also stated that many Muslims found to be unjust or unkind to a Christian was disobeying the Prophet of God, and instead encouraged Muslims to help and assist Christian leaders. The covenant also stated that Christians were not required to go to war for Muslims. So just like the previous ones, again, it's like, you guys are good as long as we're not fighting each other. We're not going to make you do our job or anything like that. And that big one there being that, like, if a Muslim is harming a Christian, then they're going against the wishes of the Prophet. Really quick right here, an example here of MPV, and I have to do like a little like shameless plug here for our upcoming book with MPV Publishing that's coming out early 2026. So MPV provides interfaith marriage services, speaking of like people who are married to non-Muslims, to couples from different faith backgrounds, helping them to solidify their vows while incorporating Islamic tradition into the service. This service is inspired by the tradition of the Prophet who protected the rights of non-Muslims to practice their faith even after their marriage to a Muslim. As you saw previously too, talking about having family members where like she would convert to Islam, but then like the male didn't, and all of that. We have examples of all of those in our book that is upcoming. So we got together and we asked a bunch of the couples from around the world that MPV has married that are interfaith couples. So that's going to be like Muslims with non-Muslims. That can be the male, female. It can be like a Muslim with a Christian. It can be a Muslim with an atheist. It can be like a Muslim with like a Hindu, like any mix there. And we asked them a bunch of questions on what their relationship is like, what their service was like, what is their relationship with their family, how do they navigate this, how do they navigate parenting and all that stuff. The book is called Between Love and Tradition, and it's going to sort of be a walkthrough, not just like this, where like the progressive Islam curriculum, where it's academic, but just real experiences from real Muslims in real interfaith marriages from around the world. So we're going to have more about that soon, coming out in early 2026. So take a look for that. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the YouTube channel if you're watching this later on YouTube. And if you're looking for a progressive place to give that zakat money, Muslims for Progressive Values is a wonderful international nonprofit organization who helps with education and social justice throughout the Muslim world, to help share the information here provided by Progressive Islam to have a more progressive world. So thank you for watching the video, and inshallah, I'll see you in the next video. Bye.